Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey.
Welcome to the talk about our wonderful artist, Russell Sharon, and his late partner, Luis Frangella. Joining us today are Russell, Rick Prol, Stephen Lack, Don Meris is our moderator, and Katie Svensson is our assistant moderator.
And Bobby G, how?
And Bobby G, the famous East Village artist who you all know and love. Don and Katie, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and in some places, good morning. I'd like to start this conversation with all the panelists. If you could talk about how you met Luis and Russell, and where and how. Let's start with Rick, please.
How did I first meet him? With Russell and Louis, both of them?
Yeah.
You're asking? Yeah. Well, Russell, I must have met through Hal Brom and at his gallery, I would think. And Luis, I met during the Pier period or just before.
It was before.
What's that?
Before the Pier.
Sorry.
Stephen, when was the first time you both met Russell and Luis?
When did I first meet Louis? Oh.
And Russell, yes.
Probably, yeah. Well, I think I met Louis. I met Russell through Leatherdale, I think. And Louis probably, was he in the Famous show with Gracie on 10th Street? Or was it Avenue, was it St. Mark's Place? St. Mark's Place, yeah. I think that's where I met him. I met David there. Everybody was there. It was great.
Okay, Bobby, when did you meet both Russell and Luis?
Well, I don't really recall. Luis and I were friends. We were saw each other a lot in the kind of downtown art community at openings and clubs. And although we weren't close friends, we were friends. I admired his work quite a lot. And Russell, I knew even less. We may have met a couple of times, but again, I don't remember exactly where or when.
Okay, Russell, when did you first meet Luis?
I met Luis in 1974 in Boston.
So before New York City.
Yes. And we worked together in Boston for a couple of years and then moved to New York City. We were both working at MIT, actually. He was working in the Advanced Visual Studies department, and I was working with ceramics, with clay.
Okay.
And he worked all the time. He never went home, really. He spent all of his time in his studio at MIT and would sleep on that mat. He had this monkish mat that he preferred to sleep on. But yeah, I met him late one night when he was about to leave for Buenos Aires. He had his suitcase, which was a cutout of an elephant. So he was walking down the street toward me in Beacon Hill with his elephant at 1 in the morning. And so we stopped and chatted for an hour. We met when I got back a month later from Buenos Aires, and then started some projects together. He was studying architecture and advanced design, and he was working with the third dimension in drawings. I think maybe you have one, Al, one of the three-dimensional drawings. And when did we leave for New York in probably 73, 73 or 74, we got a laugh together and started painting, and we had designed a bunch of handbags in the shape of different animals. So it was the election year when Carter was running against whoever he ran against, and the whole city was full of handbags, either elephants or donkeys. Bloomingdale's window, they commissioned a lot of them, and so that's the way we got by fairly comfortably.
Great. Let's move forward to the 1980s, particularly in the East Village. Do you have any recollections on how that scene was like, and what community the artists there actually brought to the table? Most of you were represented by galleries there in the East Village during that time. What was that scene like?
Are you talking to me, Donald?
To all the panelists, Bobby, Russell, Stephen, Rick.
It was a scene that grew very quickly from nothing into something fairly large and very large. My first show was with Hal Brahm on West Broadway, which was just at the very beginning of the first gallery in the East Village, actually. And so I saw it grow so quickly, and it was very exciting. Everybody seemed to get to know everyone basically within 2 weeks. The whole East Village, most of the people were showing in the East Village where so many galleries were opening. And so there were many, many, many openings for artists. It was quite easy to get a show. Oh, you just needed to pull up in a limo and look good. Just joking.
Bobby, what was that like for you to be in the middle of the art scene in the East Village in the 80s?
Well, I started out a little bit before the East Village scene, working on the Lower East Side with a group called Collaborative Projects. We did an exhibition called the Real Estate Show, which was actually the very first exhibition of the 1980s. It opened on New Year's Eve, from when 79 turned into 1980. And through that project, I participated in founding an artist-run storefront on Rivington Street called ABC No Rio. And shortly after that, actually in the spring of 80, was the Times Square show, which was, I think, an epiphany for a lot of young people, because it had this kind of do-it-yourself attitude. And that inspired a lot of young people, artists, and people associated with the art scene to start their own galleries. And this is really where the East Village art scene came from. And it very quickly exploded into perhaps 100 art galleries. And centered around that, there were many, many artists. Even though the art scene was kind of small compared to the globalized art world of today, there were a lot of people. They were interacting with each other, bumping into each other, meeting each other, as I said earlier, at openings and in nightclubs and bars. And there was a community there. And it was very open. You know, nobody, the most important thing, as far as I was concerned, in that community was, what is it that you have to say? Or what can you show me? It wasn't anything about what kind of person you were, whether you were gay or straight or trans or drag. That didn't matter at all. It was like, do you have anything to say? And the people I gravitated to were really a little bit on the outside of kind of contemporary American culture. They had gravitated to New York at a time when the landscape was sort of like bombed out and rents were low. So it was kind of a roiling artistic world with a tremendous resource of artistic energy and explosive in a sense. And a lot of the artists kind of rose up through that.
Hmm.
The ones that we know of today, talking about David, Luis, Martin, they kind of rose to the top of this kind of roiling scene with everybody interacting with everyone else. And although there was a lot of competition and envy and jealousy, pretty much what it is that you would expect, nevertheless, it was really kind of an open and tolerant, anything goes kind of world.
Mhm. Stephen, did you experience that? Was it explosive as far as the art scene in the 80s?
Oh, totally, totally. I guess I was injected into it by Sir Rodney Sir, who knew my work from Montreal. We both come from that town, and we shared some people. And then he introduced me to Gracie and Buster Cleveland, and we all met at the limo show that she was having outside of the gallery she was working in on West Broadway and Spring Street. That famous moment when Sir was dressed in livery, serving champagne and mimosas and stuff on the sidewalk outside, hoping to get the attention of Leo Castelli. So right from the beginning, you know, there was a view of the established world, but we were separate from it. It was a huge community. And one of the things I've always felt, and I said it over and over again, one of the special things about the East Village was it was like somebody jumping off a building, and the legend is that their whole life will flash before them before they hit the bottom, hoping that somewhere in all of that, there's a solution to the impact at 44 feet per second meeting the sidewalk. And I think the East Village represented that fall, because every art style that ever happened, as well as conceptual, abstract, formalism, Baroque, Rococo, everything was accepted and was being reviewed, was being considered. And I just felt that culturally, it was the best of Western civilization hitting the wall. And I think time is, I had an uncle who said one time when I was panicking about a political situation, he said, Stevie, nothing happens quickly. So the slow motion impact we've all been experiencing since then, but we were sensitive to it as it was happening.
Right. And Rick, can you expound on your experience in the 80s in the Village?
Yeah, I graduated Cooper Union 1980. And then everything kind of took off like 82. It wasn't expected in a way. Like when I got out of Cooper Union, I mean, you could see it revving up in the establishment, obviously, like Schnabel and everybody. But to have a scene like that happen, it was all very spontaneous, I guess. Or you know those Chinese things that you light and it's like an ash that goes, it grows. You know what I'm talking about? Those fireworks.
A little worm.
Yeah, it was like that. Like,
Yeah, the Chinese snake.
Yeah, and not all of my experiences were so great, but some were. But it was a difficult time, but really fun. It was really fun. It was kind of nothing like it. Nothing ever like it will happen again. I don't think. You know, it was an amazing opportunity. It just changed a lot of people's lives, you know, for the better. But again, you know, it wasn't all roses. It wasn't all. There was a lot of elements, a lot of parts of it that weren't so difficult. In hindsight, I wish I kind of knew like some things better, but it's always like that. And you know, it was sad. It was horrific how it ended. I mean, the rug really got pulled out. I mean, it just felt. I remember the summer of I think '88, and it was like the air was sucked out of New York. I don't know if other people felt that, but it was really remarkable the way it ended. I mean, it was just, a lot of people saw it coming, I guess, but you know,
Well, just to jump in, Rick, 88 followed the 87 stock market crash.
yeah,
And that, of course,
Exactly.
impacted,
yeah,
a lot
and
of people were impacted by that.
yeah, and AIDS also, of course, and then just the shifting in collectors, you know, what they wanted, what they were after. I guess that started 86, 87. That created a real sense of, you know, they were there, and then all of a sudden they seemed to abandon ship somewhat.
Yeah.
And every,
Go ahead.
yeah, no, every artist's career has these fluctuations, obviously, but it was very dramatic, you know, that yeah, the 87 crash didn't help, of course, and so it all seemed to, as much as it exploded, it disintegrated too. Like boom, boom. I guess 5 years of solid, 6 years of solid.
The 80s
Yeah,
was
how
a
long
very
did the
the 80s was very exciting a time for artists, but it's also a scary time for a lot of us because that's when the HIV crisis started. It used to be called the gay cancer grid, and for a while we were seeing a lot of artists, prominent artists who we didn't know were infected with HIV until the 90s when it exploded. What was your experience like, given that in the 80s, AIDS was just coming into the forefront in the art scene?
I remember hearing about Nicky Mulforage, and that he was sick in the hospital, and we didn't always get along, but he was kind of great, and I wanted to send him a message, and I don't think I was able to get into the hospital because of the isolation aspect and the newness of the disease, and it was kind of being explained. And as much as I wanted to communicate to him, all of a sudden he was gone. And that was like a shock. I always think of Nicholas as the first casualty, although my wife Lily was friends with Bill Stelling, and he had a lover called Saint, and he had some gay-related cancer, I think as early as 1979, 1980. So, you know, it was around, and yeah, it was a huge culling. And, you know, in America, we're cushioned from world events as much as we might be exposed to it through the media. But we aren't losing loved ones. We aren't being thrown out onto the street other than by real estate interests, et cetera, or our own indulgences. And AIDS kind of brought it home. And in the 60s and 70s, there we were demonstrating make love, not war. And now making love was killing as many people as Vietnam. So it was really a strange time. I remember I used to read Sidney Omar. He was a great astrologer, pop, but great. And he said something about one of the years in the late 70s, early 80s. He said, the chickens are coming home to roost. And that's it, you know. I mean, AIDS really brought it home. And David's outrage, Wojnarowicz's outrage, was an amazing articulation for everybody. And of course, he got singled out, and his battle with Jesse Helms and all of that. But it was an articulation and a justification for the rage that we were all feeling by our disconnect from the machine that had generated the wealth that preceded the crash of 87. I remember the arrogance of one of the CEOs on the front page of the New York Times in 87 saying that Colgate didn't owe any taxes to America because it was an international company and all of its assets or over 50% of its assets were international and no longer American. So it owed no loyalty to America. But if it got in trouble, I'm sure it would be knocking on the door to be protected by American resources. So there was that huge disconnect. Anyway, let me let someone else talk.
Bobby, go ahead, Bobby.
Well, I have a couple of things to say about this. One is I totally disagree with that characterization of the chickens coming home to roost. That implies that the people that got sick deserved it for one reason or another. But that aside, I did want to say something about Nicholas Mulforage, because he was a really interesting artist. He did needlepoint panels, and he had a great style. He was Egyptian. He had a real sharp little kind of goatee and dressed fantastically. And I was at the opening of his show at the Fun Gallery that he did not show up at. And people were asking, where is Nicholas? What's going on? And sort of there were whispers, oh, he's got the gay pneumonia. The term AIDS wasn't even in use yet at that time. And this cast a pall on this kind of East Village art scene because people were getting sick. And AIDS is a hideous disease. And it devastated a huge proportion of the downtown, not only downtown, but the whole creative community in New York, not only visual artists, but dancers and actors, musicians. And it was really, and eventually you saw people dying in their youth. And this was a devastating thing for people to contend with. I actually, I remember I had gone to so many memorials for people that died. I just couldn't go to any anymore. It was just too emotionally and personally devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, you were talking about, you know, what happened to the East Village art scene in 88 and 87. AIDS was a huge part of its kind of demise.
Mm-hmm. Rick, you graduated from Cooper Union in 1980.
Right.
That was basically the start of the AIDS pandemic. As a young artist, did you see any changes in the art scene during that time when AIDS was just coming to the forefront?
Well, how do you mean exactly?
Did you know?
1980?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't. I didn't know anything about it until a while later. I no, by 1980, I didn't. I don't recall. I really don't remember being aware of it that much at that point.
Yes.
Russell,
Yeah,
in the 80s,
okay.
the AIDS epidemic was just getting started. How did that impact the work that you did during that time period?
Well, it changed somewhat. I did a show with the gallery called Doug Gallery, Shirley Cake's Gallery, they called it. And I know I had introduced some more, I don't know, spiritualism or something more gentle into my work. Something that, a direction I could go somehow that would give me more hope. I didn't, I worked most of the time. I didn't go out. I knew a lot of people, and in the beginning, you know, there would be one, and then every week you would, someone else would get sick. It would look great one week. The next week, you see there was something wrong, because when I or anyone got diagnosed with HIV, it was basically a death sentence, an early death sentence, and it would cause a major earthquake in your whole brain and body. And so that definitely changes the way you think. It pulls your brain into a different direction. It's difficult to center it on the, normalcy or what would happen in a normal day, because you know that someone close to you or someone somewhere that you know is not in good shape.
Right.
We all helped each other. Normally, when someone would get sick, I found that there would be one or two, more than often, it would be one person who would show up out of the blue and be that person's primary caregiver. They would pay attention and keep in touch with them every day. I think that Judy Glansman sort of did that with David Wojnarowicz. I did that with Luis, and Joy did it with a friend of hers. But that's sort of what happened for everyone that died. There was a caregiver. You never quite knew where they would come from, but they would appear.
Yeah, given the many losses that we've had in the 80s from this disease, did that influence the work that you do? Did you do any artwork related to the AIDS epidemic during that time period? I know Bobby G had works that were focused on HIV, but the other panelists, did you do any work related to the disease somehow, or the loss of friends who died from this disease during that time period?
I didn't directly. There's some other issues. Metaphoric way, not in an obvious,
Stephen, did you do any work related to HIV?
Yes, I did. I did a series called Hospital Beds, which basically just was a bunch of beds, different canvases, different colors, with one or two people walking through the landscape of beds and one person seated. I can't think of any others that I did. I've always dealt with the relationship between generations. So one of the first paintings that I showed at Gracie Mansion in 1983 was "Your Parents Get the News You Are Dead." So, that had to deal with loss, but it was before the epidemic manifested itself. But in 1990, yes, I had a whole room at Gracie's Broadway gallery that was hospital beds. And the other paintings were park meets, which were men cruising in parks, abstracted and reduced. And the only other painting was Crows in the Snow, which was crows eating meat on a white background, red meat.
Right. Bobby,
So, yeah.
Bobby, go ahead.
Before we go to another subject, Stephen a few moments ago had I think read something from a newspaper article about the chickens coming home to roost or something like that.
Oh, no, that was a statement that Sidney Omar made in a prediction for one of the years coming up in the 80s, right? And I didn't invoke it as a moralistic umbrella to the AIDS, that it was chickens coming home to roost in that way. I was just thinking about the idea of epidemics of death coming to America, which seemed to be immune to that. That's all. That something was now in North America. It wasn't a moralistic thing.
I think it was.
Russell?
I'm sorry. More the foxes getting into the hen houses than the hens coming home to roost. And the foxes being the epidemic, and they raised havoc. They would,
With the chickens.
The fox.
Okay, let's move on to other things. Now, collaboration is another word that I'd like to pose to everybody. Did you, during the 80s or 90s, collaborate with each other to do art together? Has any of you done any collaborations?
Oh,
I have.
Go ahead,
Uh,
Bobby.
Well, I was working with a group called Collaborative Projects, and that was basically the foundation of what it was that we were doing. So we collaborated on painting, videos, films, performances, all kinds of stuff. Performances at the Mud Club, the new cinema on St. Mark's Place with these collaborative Super 8 films and videos. But you know, even though you've changed the subject, I did want to go back to one thing where I had lost my train of thought. You had asked, Doneley, how AIDS changed the work in this downtown community in that time. It injected anger, and that's exemplified by how David's work especially changed.
The anger that the government and society in general was not receptive to the disease that was mostly affecting gay men, especially in the arts. Is that what you're alluding to?
Right, and the political establishment either ignoring it or even worse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about that? One of the things that I'd like to, also to explore with you is you all talked about community in the 80s in the art world. Now you're all represented by galleries in New York City and beyond. Is there a sense of community right now with the younger artists that you see in the scene, similar or different from what was happening in the 1980s?
I don't see any community. I don't think there's even a community of collectors like there used to be. I think that one of the great pools of New York collectors was sidetracked by international hyper money. I think the hyper money that collects is collecting for different reasons, not as a trophy to exhibit as part of or an extension of their own political attitudes, but simply as a trophy. So they're no longer aligned with the content of the work like they were in the 80s. You know, you would see people like, well, I'll use Judy Glantzman as an example, but she would come to events dressed up, not like her own paintings, but certainly like a lot of the paintings that were coming to light in the East Village days, you know, that cacophony of color and shape that the East Village is known for in retrospect. The anger, not so much. Rick Prol was doing anger again before AIDS manifested itself.
Violence.
I don't know.
Violence, right.
Collaborations.
Violence,
I did yeah. I mean, the violence in the East Village was unbelievable. I mean, whether it was to crime. I remember you would go to an opening and people would discuss whether they were mugged in the last 24 hours. There would be, you know, you'd be talking to 5 people and 2 people had been mugged, you know, on Avenue A or whatever. Maybe I'm thinking the 70s more than the 80s, but anyway.
I remember leaving.
A show that Carla McCormick had organized at the Limbo Lounge, and I got held up at gunpoint.
I remember.
And they got away with nothing.
I remember leaving my East Village gallery with a car full of artworks to take to the West Broadway gallery, and when the car got to Houston Street heading west, there was a police car behind me with the lights flashing. I pulled over immediately. I was surrounded by 3 cops, all with guns drawn. And I got out of the car. They said, put your hands on the roof, so on and so forth, the whole 9 yards. And it was pretty dramatic. And I said, what seems to be the problem, officer? And they wouldn't talk to me. They took my ID and my license and all that sort of thing. And after about 15 minutes sitting in their car, they came back and handed it to me and said, "Have a nice day." It's like I was a white guy in the East Village leaving in a car, and somehow that was suspicious. So they pulled me over with guns drawn. Go
And they
figure.
never explained it to you. Maybe they thought you were there fleecing the poor.
Yeah. They probably thought I was a drug dealer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too.
They were just looking for a slice, Hal. They just wanted a piece. They wanted to look at big.
I was doing a photo
I
shoot.
guess.
I was doing a photo shoot with
Go
Andreas
ahead.
Thursing in an abandoned lot. Isn't that for your show that I did with you, Hal? Remember that show with me in the lot?
Absolutely, yeah.
But these guys, these narcs came running over and they checked my arms and they thought we were, I don't know. And then they left us alone and I realized we blew their cover. But yeah, I love that energy though, Ben.
And that doesn't exist anymore, right?
Not at all.
Not at all, right?
No, there's pockets of it. I mean, but not in the city. No, I mean, you go
Well,
to the West Side
coming
Highway
back.
now. Go to the West Side Highway now. I mean, it's beautiful. It's very nice. There's a landfill.
So
You
sanitized.
know what it is? There's no hidden area. There's no place you can go with a lover to, it's all, I don't know. There's just no mystery in there anymore in that way. There's no, I remember the elevated
Are you
West Side
are you
Highway.
saying,
What?
Rick? Are you saying there's a lot of bushes, but there's no blowjobs? Sorry, I had to go.
No,
there.
there's blowjobs. There's no, yeah, no cover.
There are a lot of
You gotta see it. It's like the people eating out in all the restaurants now. It's like you see everybody's food that they're eating. It's very strange. Before they'd be in the restaurant, you know what I mean? Now that they're all sitting there.
So,
We want to ask them, can I have a bite?
so what I'm hearing is that for all of you who are in your 50s and 40s and 60s, there's no collaboration with freshly graduated college students who are in the arts world. I mean, they might be represented by galleries, but there's no connection between the older generation of artists to today's artists who are just graduating from undergrad or finishing their MFA.
Yeah, not so much, I don't think.
I don't think that our crowd was so much graduates from a high-priced school. So I think that the artists of today have monetized their education for a payback, and they are completely career-oriented, which precludes experimentation and it precludes failure, and wasting time with anything that isn't monetized, that they can perceive as monetized at the moment of seeing it. So yeah, it's a whole different mindset.
Bobby, do you experience that the artists today are so focused on their art and the work that they do that they don't really connect with other artists around them?
It's impossible for me to tell. I'm not in touch with that many younger artists, but when I was teaching for a while, 7 years, and the attitude they had, which was kind of described by Stephen, was how do I get a gallery? What's the path to success in the art world? And I would just tell them, forget all that. Go out and find your community. This is what I would tell my students. And so that's my point of view. I'm sure there's stuff going on with younger artists, but I'm just not in touch with them.
I think they're smaller circles. I mean, we had such a huge circle that suddenly appeared organically. There it is, the artists. Now there's smaller circles and they don't have the same encouragement, or they don't have so many artists. There's so much work to bounce their own work off them, and so many people who are in their world, they're kindred spirits. So we always, in the East Village, our criticism was usually go for it, no matter what. you know, you would see the oddest thing and you would wonder, what is this guy doing or this woman doing? But you were excited. You didn't say yes or no. You said, I would say, go for it. I like that attitude of, you know, finish what you're doing. Something will happen that would be interesting, and go for it.
I agree with that.
You know, the 80s felt a lot
Russell.
like, the 80s felt in the East Village also, there was very conservative work that I felt like was in the East Village, and I couldn't understand, how is this stuff in this environment? Like I had a real tunnel vision about like my vision in terms of, I came out of the environment in a way, and I couldn't understand how people could be in New York City doing the work we did. It could have been done in Rome, or it could have, I mean, not that Rome is bad, I mean, but it could have been done on the moon, you know. And it struck me that there was real conservative, like, kind of galleries. They just showed, I don't know, and somebody like David or Steven or Bobby and everything, they were really from that scene. I mean, it's as if they were embodying and making work that came out of that. I mean, that to me is a phenomenon. That's more of a artistic risk, and you know, you're dealing with reality. It's like, and I taught a couple of classes, I remember, and I just couldn't, the artists, students that didn't do work that seemed to relate at all to New York at the time that they were in or something, I just couldn't understand it. And now, of course, I look at it a little differently, because yes, things are ephemeral and they change quickly. So if you didn't make work about the East Village in a couple of years, it wasn't there anyway. So, you know, it's a contradiction a little bit what I'm saying, but I just couldn't understand how some people worked without having that environment affect them in a way artistically or something. I don't know.
But that
You know what I
doesn't
mean,
have to be
Steven? You know what I
direct.
mean, Bobby? Huh?
That doesn't really have to be kind of a direct representation of the environment the work is coming out of. For instance,
No, I'm not talking
I
about a
went to
limited,
see,
people
I
still
went
have
to
to
see
be
the show
individual. But
at Hal's Gallery last week.
what?
Russell and
Yeah.
Luis show, and some of the a couple of the paintings were so moving. Luis had done these candle paintings, and it doesn't directly represent the environment of the East Village scene, soon to be devastated by AIDS, but those paintings were so evocative. They were beautiful. And well, I'm talking about the show. The other thing I really loved in that show, Russell, were your maquettes. They were so playful,
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
full of joy. And I think this is
Thank you.
something, yeah, there's one of the candle paintings. Yeah, I
Yeah.
encourage everybody to go see this show.
See,
Give
that's
more
where
context for this discussion.
Well, maybe you misunderstood me. I don't think everything needs to be Sturm and Drang, or especially don't do work like me. I don't want to see anybody. I'm just saying, from my point of view, that I understood that some people were really reacting to that moment in time and that environment, and some didn't. But I'm not talking about style. I'm not saying it's more, you know.
No, but Rick, I think you underlined it with the word individual. I
Yeah.
think
That's right.
what we're talking about is the fact that we're in an environment, in that case, it was the East Village, but it was our reaction and our interaction with that environment. And that's what we put down. So if you make a painting of a candle and it brings you to tears because you're feeling the individual's relationship to that. And I feel that maybe some of the newer work, maybe I'm out of touch with those individuals, or maybe I'm feeling that it's agenda driven. I think a lot of the East Village work was paved over in the 90s, or that aesthetic was paved over by agenda driven work. I know that Elaine Danhauser, when Gracie approached her to come to my show in 91, she said, "Oh, I'm looking for work that makes you think, not feel."
oh,
You know,
Interesting.
And that was a collector's reaction.
You know, I worked for her for a year. It was a really good deal. She had a foundation on Duane Street,
That's
And
right.
in exchange for being basically the caretaker there, she didn't pay me, but she gave me a like 2,000 square foot basement studio that I had in 1985.
1,000?
And I used to ride around with her in her limo to these East Village Gallery openings. And it was interesting in a way because it was an insight into the collector's mentality. And there were a group of collectors who were really focused on the East Village art scene. And when one of them would become interested in a certain artist, they would all kind of gravitate. I want one too. That was the attitude of the collectors. It was kind of a mob mentality. It was really fascinating to me.
Which is
By
different
the way,
from.
for a collector, she was really interesting because she was blind in one eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Which is different from the collectors of today, because I would hear from collectors, the younger collectors, what's hot, what should I buy? And that's a different take from what was happening in the 80s. Collectors actually went to look for the art, and if they liked it, they bought it. Today, it's just the other way around. And is that the experience that you're seeing at this point, given the work that you're doing and being displayed by different galleries all around the world?
I think Hal's in the best
I've
position
been
to
lucky.
answer that question.
Wow.
I think if you go back to the 80s, talking about Elaine and her husband Werner, she was very much one of the leading figures in a little circle of collectors who, as Bobby said, they certainly compared notes all the time. And one of the jokes that I had with Elaine was that she had many friends who bought art over the telephone. She would go out and she would look at things and she would buy a painting by any given artist. And before you knew it, they all heard about it through telephone calls back and forth. And then as you reflected, Bobby, they would realize that she was onto something, so they better jump in. So Elaine and I laughed about how she had the eye, meaning she had one eye because she was blind in the other eye. and all the collectors around her, bought art over the telephone. But it was true. It was absolutely true. I mean, she was out there. When we did the show of David Wojnarowicz, she was one of the first people to buy anything from that show. And my recollection is she bought two paintings, one of which eventually, after her death, was gifted to the Modern, which is great. Unlike a lot of collectors today who Don was saying, they're on this auction merry-go-round. You see somebody who you think is interesting and doing something a little new and exciting, and you buy some work at a low price, and within a year or two, you flip it at auction because they've become a hot commodity. And as we all know, this is going on more and more and more. And it's very detrimental to the artist because when they do a show the next time around, there are people trying to buy art who the dealers fear are just trying to buy it to flip it for a profit, because obviously the gallery is not going to sell it for the same price as an auction record achieved a week or a month before. So yeah, it's a totally different landscape, that's for sure. It's the commodification of the art world.
Absolutely. We have a few minutes left. Let's open this to other people in our circle right now, people who have not been talking the past 45 minutes. Do you have any questions to our panelists and comments about what they've said so far? Anybody?
And Katie will unmute everybody so they can speak.
We have.
Is Andrea still there? Is
Andrea's supposed to be here,
I
right?
don't see them.
I think Maria had a remark or a question.
Go ahead, Maria.
Oh, there's Andreas.
Maria, where are you?
I'm right here.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah,
We can't see you.
we can't see you, but we can hear you.
1 second, let me get to it. There I am. I'm going to open up my video. Yes.
There you
hello.
go. Good. Hi.
Hi there. Thank you for doing this. I really enjoy and seeing everybody, and it's an amazing energy. I just wonder, what do you mean with collaboration with younger artists? Because I've done some projects recently, and I find that the younger artists are interested in finding out, or maybe just happens to be the context in which I am.
So the collaboration that you're doing with the younger artists, is that performance or is it paintings or artwork?
It could be performance, or it could be making of objects, or something in which there is an interest in doing something together. But that could be just in this particular case. You know, I just thought I do find you have to look for it. It's not coming up so easily, because I think indeed everyone is very much focused on professionally making it as soon as possible, because there's so little opportunity to make a mistake. That is true, you know. And but that could be just in this case. I wonder what if you've tried, or if you meet younger artists as interns in a gallery or something. There are, I think, there could be an opportunity for an interview or something. But again, I just noticed that there are those opportunities.
Anybody? Can you respond to that?
I think there are those opportunities as well. I like to work with younger artists. I don't get the opportunity very often, because here I am in the middle of the woods in Minnesota with my studio. But even the local younger people are very interested. But in the East Village, artists were so easily available. You just bump into them out of the blue. So the opportunity came around, I think, much more frequently on a platter. You know, you want to work together. We gave a lot of input, if nothing else, but it was so much easier to do a collaboration when there are 1,000 possibilities right there around you. And I taught younger people more in Miami than in New York. I actually gave classes, and the same energy, the creative spirit is the same, you know, no matter what. Some places you can pull out more inspiration from what is around you, which is what happened to me in New York when I would hang around these Village. I was showing with Talon was Broadway. He opened up a gallery on 11th Street. And I had been spending time in the East Village at the Limbo and places like that. And the vacant art on Avenue A and 11th Street was where I took the plunge from the country stuff that I had been working with, landscape, that sort of thing, sculptures and paintings. And I went into the vacant lot and just picked up whatever was there and made art out of it. So there were shards of wood all painted and standing, and various primitive looking animals. And there was a reflection of the neighborhood. And I used all the material came from that vacant lot, which was a mess with sofas and that sort of thing.
Great.
Hey,
Yeah.
Russell, on the subject of picking things up from vacant lots, at the last minute, I thought I would bring something to the group. I'm showing it to you here. I don't know if you can see it. And that is a portrait of Jean-Michel by Suzanne Malouk on a window in acrylic that, you know.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. there's a matching painting at the other side of the room, which I can't get to, of Andy. So there's one of Jean and one of Andy. And of course, the one of Andy reflects Suzanne's attitude towards the interloper. And they're really quite great together.
That's wonderful. Anybody else in our audience who want to put their 2 cents into this conversation? Do we still have Beatrice with us?
Beatrice?
Andreas? Andreas, sorry.
Yeah, I'm here, yes. Hi.
Any thoughts about what you've heard so far?
Well, I thought it was really fascinating and interesting and wonderful to hear you all talk about the times, you know, when we were all young. As Maria, you noticed, we were all like in our, you know, early mid-20s, you know, and it was a different time and it's a different thinking, you know, if you're a young person, but what we're now like 40, 30, 40 years later, you know, so it's a different world and it's a different time and everything changes all the time, as we know. And but here we are, we're still around and we're the lucky ones, I would say, you know. So I would say thank you very much for all what you shared and your wisdom, you know, collective wisdom, which we all have. And it's a great thing, and it's great we have those talks.
And we have the images.
Yes.
So good to see everybody. It's wonderful.
We have a couple more, right, Katie? We have 2 more to go, right?
2 more talks, yeah.
That's right. Okay.
The next one is coming up actually very soon, on Monday night at 8 p.m. And then the following one will be sometime later in April before the close of the exhibition itself. And that we'll have Judy Glansman on that one, and hopefully Gracie Manchin, and Andreas will hopefully join us as well. And then our next one will be Russell again, and Ernie Sandage, and Russell's goddaughter, Ruby Sutton, who will do a nice talk on Monday.
Wonderful.
Hopefully you all will come to. These talks have been really great so far.
In closing, Katie, maybe you can share a few more images of from your beautiful slideshow.
Yeah, absolutely. Which we didn't really have a chance to look at today, but that's okay. Anything in particular you guys would like to see?
Did Barry Blinderman want to say something?
We want to see.
Oh, I just wanted to, I have nothing to add. I just wanted to commend the panelists. I think just about everybody but 2 people on this. So first of all, hello to all my friends and colleagues. And I want to commend you on a very clear, articulate, and comprehensive view of the scene that I was experiencing while you were. You know, whether you know a lot about it or you don't, it was very educational. So thanks to Rick and Hal and Stephen and the other Russell and the other panelists for doing this.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Very
Great
well.
to have
Also,
you
we
with
all
us.
look good.
Great to have you with us, Barry.
We're all aging gracefully. So I got to go, but thank you and glad to see everybody.
Well,
Thank you for being here,
See you,
Barry.
You're very welcome.
we're very happy to have had all of you participate. Thank you so much. Thank you, Don, for moderating. Thank you, Katie. And we'll see you all next time. This is being recorded and eventually will be available on the website of the gallery and on YouTube. So thanks again so much, and good to see you all.
Thank
And
you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.